What's up, YouTube people? It's your boy Patty McNinja, and unfortunately I had to take a couple of weeks off from making content. My life just got insanely busy, plus the only free time I did have was quickly taken up by replaying Elden Ring in anticipation of the new DLC Shadow of the Erdtree, which of course we got last weekend. And since I'm making this video, of course I've played it and I want to talk about it. So without further ado, let's rock. I do want to address something real quick right off the rip, and that is this video is not going to be my typical review. It's going to be a little bit different due to the nature of me reviewing a DLC. This is not a full review of Elden Ring, so this video won't go as in-depth as my normal reviews. Since you're watching this, I'm pretty sure you know what Elden Ring is, and the DLC basically follows the same structure of the base game. So this is going to be more of a casual conversation than a formal review. I didn't officially review Elden Ring on this channel. It came out right before I kind of started to shape this channel into what it is today. However, I do believe I've said this before in passing. I believe there is a younger generation of gamers that Elden Ring will be their favorite game of all time. And now that I've replayed it for the DLC, that opinion is solidified. It wouldn't personally be my favorite just because it came out in my mid-30s and nostalgia is a powerful drug. So there are games that I would rank higher just because they hit me in a point in my life where I was more impressionable and I had that nostalgia build up. But objectively, I can admit that Elden Ring is one of the best video games ever made. So obviously I was beyond excited for this DLC. The last few weeks replaying Elden Ring has basically been a second full-time job for me. There won't be much FaceTime on camera for this particular video just because of the massive rings under my eyes, because this game has absolutely destroyed my sleep schedule right now. You know those cheesy bumper stickers that say something like, I would rather be fishing? My mindset the last few weeks, no matter what I was doing, was I'd much rather be playing Elden Ring right now. And as far as the DLC is concerned, I will be brief just because since you are watching this, I assume you probably already know this, but for the sake of thoroughness, I will mention the requirements for the DLC, because it's not just, oh, you buy the DLC and you get to play the DLC. No, that's not how FromSoftware works with their DLCs. You do have to defeat two technically optional bosses in Rodan and Mohg, Lord of Blood. I personally never really considered Rodan optional, but I guess technically is, because you can get the Great Rune from Godric and the stupid witch in the library. I love the Rodan fight. He's a beefy boy and that fight kind of sucks, but outside the giant snake in Volcano Manor, the Rodan fight is probably the most unique fight in the game. So unless this is like your 10th playthrough and you just want to avoid that fight because he is a beefy boy or something like that, you should probably just fight Rodan because it's a fun fight. Even though it is a tough fight, it's still really unique. And so I would never consider skipping it unless it's like your 10th or whatever playthrough. As far as Mohg is concerned, I will never fight that dude again. I will avoid it like the plague. I hated that asshole. The bullshit move where you gotta shotgun your flasks is, well, bullshit. It sucks. I hated it. I hated that fight so much. I will shout out to the Elden Ring subreddit. I saw a lot of posts the night before the DLC was dropped about people posting outside of Mohg's summoning pool to provide a co-op summons. I definitely appreciate that. I'm not too proud to admit that I took full advantage of the co-op summons for that fight. I will get it out of the way right now. Don't let anyone shame you for using summons and co-op summons. It's a mechanic that the developers put in the game for a reason. I personally try to give it a go on my own. I try to get good, as the kids like to say, and learn the moves and do all that stuff. And I will try it for a while. And then if I'm just not getting anywhere, I'm gonna do the summons. I'm gonna definitely do the regular summons, and then I might do a co-op summons if I still can't beat it. I can proudly say, however, that I beat every boss, at least every boss I faced off against in the DLC, because I didn't face off against all of them. on my own except Mesmer. He can eat a whole bag of dicks. I hated that fight even more than the Moog fight. His chain of attacks seemed to never end, and he was so aggressive, I never really felt like it was my turn to attack. He also has a lot of fire attacks, which would kind of flood your screen. It was really hard to see what he was even doing, and his second phase is absolute bullshit. So after like 30 tries, I just said screw it and used the co-op summons, and I'm not too proud to admit it. I will always give it a go on my own, and there are a couple that I've beat on my first try. I'm looking at you, Millipede lady. So I'm not an absolute turd at this game. I'm just not going to continue banging my head against the wall. And again, don't let anybody shame you for playing the game the way that you want to play it. I'm sure I'm going to be getting a ton of get good comments from gamers claiming that they don't use summons. Well, if nobody is using it, then why was it so difficult to get a co-op partner right in front of Mesmer right now? Statistically speaking, it seems like a lot of you are lying about using it. Well, I got a little bit sidetracked there. Apparently, that's a trigger for me. Anyways, back to the requirements for the DLC. Beating Radahn and Moog are the only formal requirements to play, but there kind of seems to be this unwritten rule that the game expects you to be a decent level to play the DLC. And honestly, it makes sense because, yeah, maybe you can get to Radahn early game, but Moog is not a boss that many people beat the first time around. I think the statistic I saw was 35%. Only 35% of the people that played this game originally beat Moog until it was required to do so for the DLC. And he's not one that you're probably going to get to until you're a decent level. He's kind of a mid to late game boss. In Elden Ring and Soulsborne games in general are notorious for being difficult, but the DLC is even worse because it assumes you're a high level and are good at the game to get this far. I've actually seen a lot of people complain about the difficulty, and I've honestly been very surprised by that. Sure, it's difficult, but I didn't think it was anything insane. Like I said, the game assumes that you're a decent level and you're probably pretty good at this game. I mean, if I can do the DLC, yes, again, I used the co-op summons one time, but still, I'm not great at these games. So if I can do it, anybody could do it. Plus, there are new upgrades called Revered Spirit Ashes and Scattered Tree Fragments. One helps booster your summons and Torrent, more on him later, and the fragments just boost your character. Now, they only work in the Land of Shadow, so don't expect them to help you in the land between. So if you're having difficulty in the DLC, I would suggest collecting those, or of course, just using a room farm in the base game like the giant bird in Mogon Palace. Just don't expect to be able to rush through the DLC, because if you are underpowered, you will get absolutely wrecked. The bosses are tough and they will humble you pretty quickly if you aren't decently leveled up character and you have pretty good equipment. I would say at bare minimum, I would say level 150, maybe 60 vigor will probably do it with a maxed out weapon if possible. Don't worry, the DLC is pretty generous with the smithing stones, so if you do come across a weapon you like, which is likely because there's a ton of new weapons and equipment in the DLC, you can upgrade it, no problem. The map is only about a third of the size of the base game, and one section is completely optional and does take a bit of trial and error to unlock. However, what the DLC's map lacks in size, it makes up in height. I was surprised at how vertical the environment was. Therefore, it feels like there's a lot more platforming in the DLC than there was in the base game. Sure, platforming was part of the original game, but it kind of felt like optional. I did most of my platforming just because I was exploring the environment. The DLC platforming felt much more built into the game. It is a mechanic that they are kind of forcing you to do if you want to get your money's worth for the DLC. There's a section of the later game where you're literally walking on the rafters of this giant storehouse, and my butthole was clenched the whole time. I was convinced I was gonna get knocked off. There's these vampire bats, and then there's also these sorcerer dudes that will shoot shit at you to try to knock you off the rafters. So I was clenched the entire time. Hopefully you got good double jumping with Torrent in the base game, because that also feels required in this game, hence the Revered Spirit Ashes. Torrent was always a big part of the main game for me, but he's critical in the DLC. There is an entire section of this map where it's just literally beautiful forests that kind of rest on these mountain cliffs that you need Torrent to kind of jump around from. Therefore, the DLC does feel different than the base game without kind of reinventing the wheel, so to speak. I also do want to give FromSoftware some props for kind of going out of their way to fix one of the few complaints I have with the original Elden Ring game. If you've explored one cave or catacomb, you've basically seen them all in the base game, and it does feel like they tried to fill out those areas more. They aren't crazy different, but enough that it didn't feel like it was just checking that box. Like, it felt like they were actually making an effort to make them different. Now, not all of them were fun. There's one that I think it was like the Scorpion Catacombs or something like that, where there was a lot of those like basilisks, I think is what they're called, that spit out the death that will kill you immediately. That's super annoying. So that catacomb wasn't the most fun for me, but at least it was a lot different. It didn't feel like the exact same thing that I had seen a million other times in the base game. And I know it's cliche and pretentious to say that the art style made me want to stop and kind of take it all in, but it's true. Elden Ring might not be the most technically stunning game, but the art style makes up for that tenfold. I did find myself just kind of riding around on Torrent, just looking around because it looks so cool to me. They did kind of go out of their way to make sure that each area felt different than the one before. So it made me want to kind of ride around and explore a lot more. Speaking of riding around, I do have to mention that, like the base game, I did find myself riding past a lot of enemies that were kind of just wandering around the open world. I did make an effort to stop and explore on foot sometimes, but if you were hoping that they would kind of put a stop to that in the DLC, you will be disappointed. You almost kind of have to make an effort, like I said, to kind of get off Torrent and go out on foot to really experience some of these enemies, because a lot of them you can just literally ride past. Even in the cities and in dungeons, it feels like there were easy ways to kind of cheese past enemies without having to mess with them. And I get that there's that walk back to the boss that is kind of the staple of Soulsborne games, but this DLC felt especially bad. There's literally a section of the late game where you come across a couple of really strong enemies in a row, but both are in kind of a wide open section. It's almost like the game is asking you to just get their attention and try to kind of lure them out just so you can run around them. I tried to be honest, I tried to give it a go, and they're pretty tough enemies, so I basically killed them once, died shortly after that, and had to go through that area again, and I just ran around them after that. Like, I was like, okay, I fought you one time, I kind of checked that box, but the game gives you this opportunity to just run around them, and I'm going to take that opportunity. Like, the game is punishing enough. When it kind of gives me this out, I'm definitely going to take it. So kind of finishing up, I don't want to do a deep dive into the story too much. Like the base game, the story is cool, but it's honestly not the main reason I'm playing the game. I feel like that with a lot of Soulsborne games where you don't necessarily need the story. I know that there's some lore heads out there that love these games, that love the story, and I appreciate the story. I'm all for a fantasy story. I dig some of the stuff that I know about this lore, but it's not the main reason I'm playing the game. It's a beautiful, punishing game where I get to take on these really cool boss battles with these really cool weapons. That's the main reason I'm playing games like this. So the story is not a main part of it for me. I do feel like this feels more connected to the base game than I expected. I do have to admit this is the first FromSoftware DLC that I have played, but I've heard that they don't always connect directly with the base game, so I was just surprised because that was my expectation going into it. There's literally an NPC that you come across that served Moog. You know, the boss that you killed to get to the DLC, so that was a bit awkward. That does come up towards the end of that storyline, so I thought that was pretty interesting. But I want to be kind of vague with the story just because, again, it's not something that was a big part of my playthrough. And I have heard people describe Shadow of the Erdtree as Elden Ring 1.5. It's not quite a sequel, but it's definitely more than your standard DLC. And even though I don't play much DLCs in general, and this is my first Soulsborne DLC, I would definitely agree with that. And I would honestly take it a step further. If you could Men in Black memory wipe our brains of the base game and this DLC released as the original game in terms of scale, obviously, of course, the story wouldn't really make much sense out of context, but just the scale of this game, if this was the original game, I still think people would love it. It's still a great game. It's only dwarfed in comparison to the massive scale of the original game. If we didn't have the original game to begin with, this is still an amazing game. Most studios would be proud to call Shadow of the Erdtree a full game for them. And this is just a DLC for FromSoftware. They're just on a completely different level. I loved this game. I thought it was amazing. I am really, really glad that I replayed it and played it as a different character into the DLC. I'm just so glad that it gave me an excuse to revisit this game, just because I'm a guy that wants to play everything. So even if I love a game like I did with Elden Ring when it first came out, I'm not a guy that usually goes back and replays games all that often, because there's always the next game that comes out. And I'm really glad that the DLC kind of forced my hand a little bit. I knew I wanted to play it, but I also knew I wanted to replay Elden Ring to do so. And so I'm really glad that it got me back into it, because I've been having an absolute blast, except for the fact that I need to go to bed because I'm very sleepy. But as always, those are just my thoughts on the new DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree. Let me know what you thought in the comments down below. Let me know who your favorite boss, your least favorite boss, so on and so forth. Also, if you like this video, which you obviously did, smash that like button, as the kids say. Consider subscribing, and if you do subscribe, ding that bell. That way you're notified every time I post another video. I try to post weekly gaming related content, so if you dig that type of content, which you obviously do if you made it this far in the video, definitely consider subscribing and dinging that bell. But until next video, take it easy. What's up, YouTube people? It's your boy Patty McNinja, and this is my boy Yoshi, aka Kitty Boy, and we were just talking, and we agree that since you made it this far in the video, you might as well subscribe. You wouldn't want to disappoint Kitty Boy, would you?